My name is Ryan Winnicke. I'm with RiteSoft as a support and implementation specialist. So I help people through the support process as well as new customers implementing it, reviewing their processes and their operations, and getting riteSCAN up and running and using it to its fullest functionality in their operations. So it's been a nice quest to kind of learn and see how we can better utilize some of the functionalities of riteSCAN. I do have everybody on mute right now, so I'm just going to ask if we hold all the questions until the end of the presentation. We'll open it up for about 15 minutes or so to questions. As well as we're going through the presentation and you want to write down your question, feel free to put it in the chat window and we can address it at the end as well. So if there are any technical difficulties, for some reason my screen stops showing or you can't hear me for some reason anymore, feel free to chime in and just let me know and we'll get that addressed right away. So other than that, we can kind of get started here, and as you guys know, this is the first webinar of a series of webinars that we'll be beginning to perform on a bi-monthly basis. So we'll have more webinars coming up throughout the year as well. So today's webinar, what we're going to cover is basically the 5 steps to being able to utilize SmartScan in riteSCAN. And what we're going to also cover is the PO receipt printing process today that goes along with setting up SmartScan. So basically we'll begin here and just kind of start reviewing. Today's plan, basically we're going to review SmartScan, go through how to set up a label output from riteSCAN. So that's how do we set up the label format for riteSCAN to read and send to the label software. And then we're also going to go through how to set up SmartScan, how we map those data variables that we want to put into a barcode. And then what is SmartScan? Basically, some of you might have heard of riteSCAN before, however, not necessarily knowing what it is or how it works. So what we're going to do is just touch on that as well and really make sure you have a full understanding. So what SmartScan is, basically, is the ability to take a single barcode and put multiple pieces of data into that barcode. So for example, you could have a barcode that has your stock code, your quantity, your warehouse, and your lot number in it. And what riteSCAN does is able to take all of those pieces of data in one barcode and map them to the correct fields when you're scanning in a certain module in riteSCAN. So it can really streamline your processes that you're going through to help facilitate and input the data directly into riteSCAN, all within one quick click of one barcode. So it can be really efficient. So what I would like to do is just kind of start out with a brief overview of how that works in riteSCAN. So what we're going to do is first go through a transaction in warehouse transfers without SmartScan. So I'm just going to go into SmartScan or into warehouse transfers, and I have 4 barcodes on my label here. So what I would have to do is first scan the stock code barcode, and then I would have to scan the quantity barcode, the warehouse, and then also the lot number. And then what I'm going to do is actually enter the warehouse that I'm transferring it to and post this transaction. So that's a typical way that a lot of you may be doing things today, which still is an effective and fast way of getting the data into riteSCAN. However, with SmartScan, we're able to combine all of that into one single label. So for example here, this is one single label with multiple pieces of data that we would be able to scan directly into riteSCAN. So I'll just show you how that works. So as you'll notice now, the SmartScan dialog box popped up. So what that means is it's prepping me that I'm going to be scanning in a SmartScan label. So when I scan into that box, I have one barcode here. You'll notice that all of the fields popped up. So it automatically populated the associated fields that are in that barcode with one scan. What this allows me to do is just much quicker scan one barcode and perform the transaction. So now all I have to do is simply go in and post this transaction, and it's done. So SmartScan can really help quickly facilitate your processes and the transactions that are taking place in your warehouse. So if people are doing numerous warehouse transfers throughout the day, it can really streamline and add up over time as you start to be able to facilitate that through one scan versus having to scan multiple pieces of data when you know it's all there already. So one of the questions that some of you might ask is, well, how do we get that barcode? You know, some people are labeling software or labeling their stock items when they come in the purchase order receipt module. So when you're receiving it in, you can print your own internal barcode labels at that time, which allows you to manipulate what your barcodes look like. So that's going to be the easiest way to facilitate that. So what we're going to do next is actually get into the process of how we set that up. So one of the first things that we're going to cover is just how you would set up a label file in riteSCAN. Some of you might already have this in place and you're doing it. So we're just going to recap what options you have, some of the functionalities, and go through that process as well. So the very first step that you're going to go through with setting up a label file in riteSCAN is creating a blank notepad document. So if you guys are familiar with Notepad, most computers will have it on there. In Windows, I'm just going to open a blank document. The next step that you're going to do is if you take a look at the riteSCAN printing guide, if you guys have had access to our support portal, it has all of the documentation needed, and that riteSCAN printing guide has all of the list of variables that you could possibly print from riteSCAN from each of the different modules. So you can take those variables and put them into that document, which we'll do shortly here, and then save that file as a .label file to be used in riteSCAN. So one thing to note, which I found is kind of interesting that some people may use, is the ability to take and use supplier stock codes when your things are coming in the door. So for example, in SysPro, if you use the alternate key fields, the supplier cross-reference field, or the customer cross-reference fields, you can set up a riteSCAN to be able to interpret those barcodes that you could be receiving from vendors and suppliers and convert them to your internal barcodes directly and read them as your internal barcodes. So it can be a really helpful feature when you're receiving products from a number of different vendors and you have those barcodes in your SysPro system already. Well, now riteSCAN can interpret those as well. And that can be set up in the admin functionality to interpret those different types of fields as well. So what we're going to do is actually just open a blank notepad document here. So give me just a second and we'll open that. So you'll see here I have a blank notepad document and I've pre-set up my variables that I took from the riteSCAN printing guide. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste those in there to show you the format. So I'm going to enlarge this for you guys. So as you can see here, I have these variables that I want to print in my label file. The stock code description, the quantity, the lot number, the reference, as well as the date and time. So these are all the variables that I want to print on my label file. So I'm going to put them in here, and as you'll notice, they're in curly braces and separated by a comma. So each variable, if you wanted to add more or take some out, you just got to have them in curly braces and separated by a comma. So the next step to this, now that I have all of my data variables, is to save this file. And as you can remember, one of the key components is to save it as a .label file. So what I'm going to do is actually call this PO receipt. As you can see, I have lots of other ones in here. This is our first webinar, so I've been definitely doing some practicing. PO receipt 1 here is what we're going to call this .label. And I'm going to save it to my desktop just so it's easy to access. You can save it wherever you want because we're uploading it into the system later on. The desktop is just an easy place for me to know where to find it. So I'm going to save that file. And now we're done with creating the contents for the label file. So what we're going to do is go into the next step. And the next step is going to be actually applying that label file into riteSCAN. And where that takes place is in the riteSCAN admin application. What we have to do is actually take that label file we created and upload it to the riteSCAN system so that it can be used by everybody that is accessing that system. And one thing to note, if you already have your label printing automation in place, what you're going to have is a folder on your server that riteSCAN exports your label files to. So each transaction is going to put those label files to that folder. So for example, I've created my label folder already. I have a folder on my C drive that's named riteSCAN printing, and it's just an empty folder that it'll point to to export all of the data to. And what happens next is the label software, whether it's Bartender, Nice Label, or any other third-party software, is going to be watching that folder for any new data to come in, and then automatically print those labels as the new data is being imported into that folder structure. So if you have that automation set up already, you're likely going to have that folder. So what we'll do is take a look at the admin utility now to actually set that up. So what I'm going to do is go into System Setup here, and this is the admin utility. If you guys are familiar with accessing this, this is where all of the license registration takes place, your security settings, operator settings, anything like that is all done within the admin utility here. So I'm going to go under System Setup, and what we want to do is actually set up our label for purchase order receipt. That's what we discussed we're going to be creating our label file for today. So that's where I'm going to actually apply it to this module here. So I have one in there, but I actually want to create a new one now. So I'm going to create a new one. Give it a description. This can be whatever you like. So what I'm going to actually just call this one is SmartScan 1 for our testing purposes today. The next step is to actually upload the label file that we recently created. So I recently created the label file here. Let me grab the correct one. PO Receipt 1. And as you notice, it has the extension for the .label file. It is required to have that extension on there for it to upload appropriately. So I'm going to select that file. As you can see, it's now uploaded to that system there. And the last step is to put in the device path. And as you can remember, basically this is where your folder is being read by the Nice Label or label printing software. So mine is on C drive, and it's called riteSCAN printing. So I'm just going to put that back in there, and then we're going to want to save this print target. So once it's saved, you'll see it was then added to this print targets here for this module, and it's only for this module that it's applying that print target. So if you were to want to apply one for another module, you would want to create that in the separate modules here as well. So, all right, we're going to go back to our slides here. So the next thing to do once you've actually created that label file that's available, you also want to apply it to the users. And this can be applied on an all users basis. Most people are going to set up a label file and allow all of their users to access that. If you did want to limit it for, say, just to if you have a purchase order or a receiver and you want to apply it just to their account, you can do that as well. If you want to apply it to all, which I'm going to be doing today, you can just do it for all of the operators. So one of the big kind of catches with settings, and you guys might have ran into this in multiple different areas when you're working with riteSCAN, is if you're making changes in the admin utility, you need to log out of the Windows client or whatever client device that you're using and log back in for those changes to take effect. So if you're wondering why you changed a label file and it's not, or security setting and it's not taking effect, well, make sure that you log out of the actual client and then log back in, because it's going to re-pull in those new settings that you just applied. One of the other interesting things that I think a lot of people don't realize is there's the ability to print labels ad hoc in riteSCAN. If you go to the Utility tab, there's actually a label printing module which allows you to print labels at any time, so you can put in a warehouse stock code, quantity, whatever information you want to put in there to print, and you can actually print labels at any time without performing an actual transaction. So that's a nice way if you ever find product that needs to be labeled and for some reason it's not, you can just create a label on the fly that way. So let's actually go into the admin application now, and we're going to apply that label file that we just, or print target that we just created. So to do that, we're going to go under the Operators tab here, and you can see I'm going to select all operators, and we're wanting to apply this label or print target for purchase order receipt. So I'm going to go under my purchase order receipt module, and then there's going to be the print settings tab down here. So we're going to expand that, And the one we recently created was the SmartScan 1. So these are all of your available print targets that you can select. If you want to add multiples, you can. Most people only have one or two, but some people, if they're receiving different products with different requirements that they want to print, they can have their operators have multiple different label files to choose from as well. So I'm just going to apply the SmartScan label file today, add that in here as one of the options. And you'll also want to make sure that this allow purchase order print is ticked. If this isn't ticked, it's not going to allow your operators to actually print a label at this process. So you will want to make sure that's enabled as well. So go back and save these settings. Make sure that you're always saving those settings for them to take effect, and then logging back into the client. So, all right, let's go back to our PowerPoint again. So one of the next steps that we're going to get into is, now that we've defined our label printing process, we're going to actually set up SmartScan in riteSCAN. So there's kind of two different concepts to SmartScan as far as how you can set up a barcode with multiple pieces of data. So the first one is going to be sequential, and what that means is basically if I'm always having a barcode that I know the order of the data variables is always going to be stock code warehouse bin, and that's not going to change, sequential is going to be the best way to perform that SmartScan or set it up. That's typically what most people are going to do because their barcodes that they're using aren't changing their data variable orders. However, if there is a customer or if there is somebody that needs to use prefix, prefix is a way to, rather than using a sequential order, you're using a slight prefix in front of the actual variable that is identifying what it's mapping to. So for example, you'll see in my below example for prefix, there's SCA100. Well, what that means is the SC is the prefix that it's associating as stock code A100, and then it's also mapping the WH for warehouse and then the actual warehouse data. So what that allows you to do is, if for some reason the order changes, then one time it's going to be stock code warehouse bin and the next time it's bin warehouse stock code, it's going to use the prefix to actually identify where those items are supposed to be mapped to. So it can be helpful. Most people are going to use the sequential order, but you do have the options to set it up both ways. So let's actually go in and walk through what it's like to set up a SmartScan process. So we're back in the admin functionality here, and we're going to go under the SmartScan tab. So you can see I have one format set up in here, but we're actually going to create a new one. So I can select new. We can give it a name, whatever you'd like to name it. We can name this one SmartScan 1 for today's purposes. The next field is going to be the delimiter field, and what this means is, what is your pieces of data separated by? Most cases they're going to be separated by a comma. Sometimes you could have a comma quote delimiter, but whatever sort of delimiter you have in between each piece of data, you're going to want to put into this field. So mine is going to be set up as a comma delimiter today. You can set up your date and header and trailer information. We don't need that today. Most people don't set that up. So what we can do is we're going to select our type, and I'm going to have mine set up as sequential. So when I say sequential, that means I want to make sure my order that I create those items in here is going to match the order that my barcode label is printing. So my barcode is going to be in the order of stock code, quantity, and lot. So that's the order I'm going to set these pieces of data up in. So I can start by giving them an ID. So let's start with stock code and put it correctly. And then we're going to select the field that we want to map it to in riteSCAN. So you'll see this list here. This list is all of the possible fields that you could map something to in riteSCAN. But what we're going to put this one to is the stock code field, so we can find that variable. And then the last column is the number of characters. So if you have items that you know it's going to be a preset limit of characters, so for example, if all of your stock codes are a 10-digit code, you could set that limiter in here. You don't need to. If that's something that could change, you can leave it as blank, and being it's sequential, it'll just know based on the comma delimiter, but you can also put in the number of characters. So we're going to add this one now. and it's going to add it to our bottom list. So as you remember, the next thing that we want to add is going to be the quantity. So I can give this quantity an ID, and we're going to select the quantity field from riteSCAN that we want to map it to, and we're going to add this one as well. So the last one that we're going to create is the lot number. So if you have a lot traceable system, this could be bin, it could be lot, it could be whatever data that you want to map to in riteSCAN that fits your guys' operations. So what I'm doing today is the stock quantity and lot number. So we're going to select lot out of here as well and add that last variable. So those are the three variables that I want to map to my riteSCAN system. So once I have that completed, what I'm going to do is save this transaction, and you'll notice now it's one of my available formats to select from. So let's go back into the PowerPoint. And the next step is going to be applying that. Just like the print settings or the print targets that we applied recently, we're also going to apply the SmartScan options to each operator or all operators, and then the module that we want to use it in, and then also how we want to use it in that module. So one of the questions that is available is to how we want to use it. If you remember that dialog box at the very beginning that said SmartScan in it when I entered the window, well, there's a few different options for how your operators can use that dialog box. One of the options is to have it set up so it's always on. So as soon as they enter the module and after they post transactions, it's going to have that SmartScan dialog box for them to rescan in. That's the way most people are going to use it when they move to a complete SmartScan operation for a certain module. The other option is manual, and what that means is they can go in, select options, and then SmartScan, and it'll open the window for them when they want to use it. So if there's a warehouse that has some SmartScan labels and some not, you can leave it as manual so that it's not always prompting them each time. So there's a few different options for how you want to apply it to your specific operations as you're going through the different phases. So let's actually go in now to the riteSCAN admin and apply that as well. So we're going to go under our operators tab again, and I'm going to apply this to all operators for the warehouse transfer module. So one thing to note, you guys might kind of be wondering, well, why am I going into warehouse transfer? Well, there's two separate things. There's the purchase order receipt, which is where we're printing the label, and the warehouse transfer is where we're actually consuming the label with SmartScan. So this could be warehouse transfer that you're using SmartScan. It could be job issue. It could be job receipt. It could be sales order picking. So there's the two different components, and wherever you want to use SmartScan, you're going to apply it to that module. So the main one I want to use today is warehouse transfer. So what we're going to do is go into the warehouse transfer module. Under the SmartScan settings drop-down menu, we're going to select the correct SmartScan format that we want. And we just created the SmartScan 1, so we're going to use that one. And then this is where I discuss how you can set the options for where the dialog box displays for SmartScan. I'm going to set it up to when entering the module and after post. You can always cancel out of it to perform a normal transaction if your operator needs to. This is just the easy way of it's always up and available for your users. So we're going to go ahead and save those settings as well. And now they should be applied. So the last component of this process that we're going to go into is defining our label format. So you guys all might use different types of label softwares. The most common ones that I work with our customers is probably NiceLabel and Bartender. And they work very similar to how that process is set up. Today I'm going to be going through NiceLabel and showing you my label format that I've set up in NiceLabel, explain how each of those variables work, and then ultimately explain how that barcode with SmartScan capabilities works and is set up to be consumed. So we're going to actually go into NiceLabel, and if you guys have questions more in depth about how the label printing software works or setting up your labels or things like that, we can definitely help you out and get you directed. If we don't have the answers to your questions specifically for the label software, get you in the right direction. I work with MCAT quite a bit as well. They're great. They're a nice label partner, and they'll help you get from start to finish on making sure all of your automation and label printing needs are met completely. So lots of different options, and we're here to help as well. So let's actually open Nice Label, and I'm going to be in Nice Label Designer 2017 today. So I've created this label file format, and you'll notice here there's a few different question marks hanging around there, and you're kind of wondering, well, what's the question marks for if you haven't been in label software? Well, what these are the variables that I've created in riteSCAN to print. So for example, each time that I perform a transaction in riteSCAN, it's going to automatically map these variables to fill in the question marks with the correct data. So for example, stock code could be my lot 100, description. All of these will be pre-filled each time we perform a transaction. This is the date as well, so that's going to be imported into there as well. And I've already set up my back end of the automation process, so each time that I perform a transaction in riteSCAN and select print, it's going to automatically print my label file to my printer for me and fill in these variables with this label format that I created here. So one of the other key components that you might be wondering is, you see that I have a 2D barcode here. You can definitely use 1D or 2D barcodes with SmartScan. The one thing that I do recommend is if your hardware is compatible with the 2D barcodes, when you start getting multiple pieces of data in one single 1D barcode, it can get quite lengthy. So the 2D barcodes can help handle that process of more data within one simple barcode, and that's why I actually use the 2D barcode here. One of the other components is, you might ask, well, what types of different code formats can I use? It's really dependent on what you're set up and what kind of a hardware you're using. As long as it's compatible with the hardware, it's completely compatible with riteSCAN's SmartScan functionality as well. So let's actually dive into this barcode here, because that's the most important piece to SmartScan, is what's all contained within this barcode. So when I click on this here, you'll see the multiple pieces of data in here. So I have the stock code, the quantity, and the lot all within this single barcode. And they're actually going to be separated by a comma delimiter, as you'll see here. So what that barcode would look like is, it's going to first have the stock code variable, the quantity variable, and then the lot variable. And each of those are going to be separated by a comma. So even though with the 2D barcodes it doesn't display it below here, that's going to be the data that is actually within that barcode there. The one nice thing about the 1D barcodes is you can still get the display below to view what's exactly in your barcode as well. So basically that sums up how we're creating the label file and what that label file will actually look like. You can have whatever sort of barcode or label file template that you want to have set up. You can have different pieces of data on there if you think there's something specific to your business operations. You can have whatever sort of data you want on your label file, and that barcode has just got to be the data that's needed to be entered into riteSCAN. So definitely lots of options, lots of sizes, lots of types of different options you can set up each of your label files in your operations. So what we're going to do actually now is go ahead and perform a transaction in riteSCAN just to view that our label file is being printed as we want it to be. And this kind of shows you some of the different techniques you can use to test to make sure that everything is working correctly. So let's go into riteSCAN here, and I'm going to close out. And if you can remember, one of the things that we always want to do is log out for those changes to take place. So I'm going to log out and then log back into my system here. Give it just a second here. All right, one of the other key components that I didn't touch on very well yet was when you're updating your label files in the admin utility, you also want to update them on each of the clients. So what I recommend doing is going to the utility tab here, and if I go under print labels, options, update labels, this is going to bring in all of my changes to my labels that I've made recently. And this does need to be done on each client device that's being used because it's storing that information locally with those new updated label files. So you will want to make sure that if you're running into issues, make sure you update your labels. So it's always going to be under that Options tab. So let's actually go into a purchase order and receive one here. I have one pre-set up. So I'm going to select this order, 450. We're going to view the order, and we're going to want to receive this stock code in here, lot 100. In this case, I'm not going to receive the complete quantity. I just want to receive in 10. And I'm going to enter my lot number for this, which is going to be 1118. And if I wanted to put a reference in here as well, I can put that information in here. So a lot of people will have a reference, for example, set up as a RS with the username so they know who's receiving things and things like that. But this is completely up to you what you would like to utilize within that reference field. So we're going to then post this transaction. And it's going to tell me some warnings. And this brings you to the print screen. So this is where the operator sees the print screen and is able to view the data that's printing. They can select the number of copies. They can also select if there were multiple types of labels to print. They could select from the one they want to choose. I only have one in here today. I can select then the copies, and then this is the data that's actually being printed. So if you remember way at the beginning when we were setting up that label file with Notepad, these are each of the elements that we selected we wanted to print. So I wanted to print the stock code, the description, the quantity, the lot number, the reference, and then the date as well. So one little shortcut that you can also do in this stage is if you didn't update your labels, I can go into options here and update my labels directly from here. So you'll see I got labels updated. So there I know my labels are now updated. So when I click print here, I'm going to just print one copy. It's going to give me that successful transaction. I have my automation set up, so it's already processing that. And one of the things you can do to verify this is view that print folder that we discussed earlier. So if I actually go back to that print folder, in the riteSCAN printing, so this is on my server typically, and it's going to be under riteSCAN printing is where I have it printing. I should see a transaction that was performed recently. So as you can see here, there was a new print file outputted to here. So I can see that it was printed at 133. And this lets me know that it successfully printed that file from riteSCAN to the Nice Label software. The other component that you're going to want to verify is going to be the fact that it actually printed the label file on your label software. If you're printing it on a label printer or a regular printer, it should have printed that out automatically for you. So let's go to the next steps here. So this is what my label file actually looks like now. After I printed it, you'll see I have my barcode and then all the data associated to that transaction as well. So what we're going to do is actually take this label file and utilize it with riteSCAN. So to do so, I have my label file printed out with me in front of me here. So we're going to go back into riteSCAN now, being we're done in here. And we're going to go into warehouse transfers to actually utilize the riteSCAN label that I just recently created. So I got my riteSCAN dialog box now, and I'm going to scan my 2D barcode. And you'll notice that it pre-filled all of the elements for me. So all I have to fill in now is my warehouse and then also the warehouse that I'm moving it to. And these fields can be retained, so if an operator is constantly in warehouse transfer, it's going to automatically remember they're moving things from warehouse E and they're usually moving it to warehouse FG, which really just kind of helps streamline those operations as well. So let's post this transaction, and now you can see it posted successfully and is ready for me to do the next one with riteSCAN. So everything is working from start to finish. We created our label file, we set up riteSCAN, we tested actually printing with that new label file, and then we actually consume that barcode throughout our operations. And one thing just to note is with that SmartScan label barcode, you can consume it in multiple different areas of your operations. You know, you can consume it in your warehouse transfers, you can consume it in job issue, job receipt, sales order picking, and all the other modules that you want to use it in. The only two modules that riteSCAN can't be used in, or SmartScan can't be used in, is the inspection process for PO receipts and the inspection process for WIP. So other than that, SmartScan can really help improve your operational efficiencies. It may not seem like a lot at first, but when you start to add up the number of clicks that an operator is doing over the day and the number of transactions being performed, it can really help streamline things, just create it more accurately. We know that we're scanning it to the correct fields right away and things like that, really reducing the amount of errors and just the ease of use for your operators that are doing this on a daily basis. So other than that, that kind of sums up our conversation. And the last thing, I just want to open it up for questions. I'm going to let everybody come off of mute here, so if you want to put yourselves back onto mute, feel free. But I just want to open it up so anybody can ask questions at any time here about riteSCAN or the SmartScan process as well. So, does anyone have any questions? You can also enter your questions in the chat window and I can read them off as well. Is anyone using SmartScan today that's here? All right, well I got one question here. Give me a second. So one of the questions that I have is that the hardware can be really expensive. For example, a gun can cost $2,500 to be able to use riteSCAN. Well, there's lots of different options for riteSCAN, and a few of our customers have come up with lots of different creative ways of reducing the cost of the equipment. So for example, I know some of our customers are using laptops with just the basic tethered barcode reader like I'm doing today. Tablets are another big one that's coming up fairly quickly, where it gives you a cheaper mobile platform but still gives you a fairly good platform to move around your warehouse and perform those transactions with you. So rather than going to a completely ruggedized mobile handheld, you can use laptops with carts. I've seen tablets with Bluetooth barcode readers and lots of different options like that to kind of reduce the amount of costs and the upfront costs associated with it. So, any other questions? All right, so one of the other questions I have here is, can you apply logic in the label printing process only for a particular PO or supplier or stock code? So to answer your question, when you're talking about the logic in place, I'm assuming that, so there's one thing you can do is you can always apply different modules to only print certain sorts of, so for example, if I only want to print in the PO receipt process, I can set it up to only allow it to be printing in that process. As far as the logic for being able to only print certain stock codes, that isn't quite in the product yet today, but that's definitely something that could be considered for being able to kind of filter what's being printed and what needs label printing as well. So. One of the other questions was, is this included in what we own now? Yes, SmartScan is a functionality that was added to the product a while ago, and you should have access to it. It's part of the initial product modules and can be used throughout the whole product. If you do not have access to SmartScan today, likely I would recommend looking at upgrading your product because it might be in one of the newer releases of riteSCAN as well. Currently we're on version 44.1 today, I believe is what the most current version is. So feel free if you're ever wondering about upgrading your product or need assistance with that. Our support is definitely here to help. If you have any questions regarding a certain module or upgrading or the label printing process, feel free, you can reach out to our support team at any time. So all right. So one of the other questions is, how do I know what version I'm on? Just to confirm, so you can always see what version you're on if you go to your utility here and About riteSCAN. It should tell you your version number right in this window. So if you're ever questioning the version or if there's been enhancements or anything like that, you can see that in here. There's also release notes in our new support site as well, so you can see exactly what's been released since your version as well. So that can be really helpful. The only limitation to upgrading is if you're on Windows Server 2003, then there's a certain limitation. You have to be on Windows Server higher than Windows Server 2003. Otherwise, you're going to be limited to version 37. So that would be the only limitation for upgrading. So one of the other questions, is this compatible with version 7 of SysPro? Yes, it definitely is. So if you're in the process of upgrading from version 6 to 7, it's just a simple flip of a switch in the admin utility to be able to be moved over to version 7. So you'll see under here in general settings, I have the SysPro version. So if you're going through an upgrade process, don't fear, riteSCAN's not going to be a challenge to upgrade. It's really just a flip of a switch here when you're moving from version 6 to 7. We'll move swiftly along. We have lots of people running both versions, running on both versions of SysPro as well. So definitely no problems there, and if you do have any questions regarding that process, feel free to reach out to our support team. So any other final questions as we're wrapping up here? All right. One of the other questions is, what types of delimiters can be used in your barcode? Really a number of different delimiters can be used in your barcode to separate each of the data elements. So for example, I'm just going to go back to our first slide. Let's see here. So as we look in here at this label file, you're going to have a delimiter selection. A lot of the common ones are going to be quotes or comma, could be semicolon as well. It's really up to you how your barcode is going to be separated. But all you'll want to do is make sure that you're consistent with setting up SmartScan and your label, that you're using the same delimiter throughout each, and it'll be able to accommodate that no problem. So any other questions at all? All right, well, if nobody has any more questions, I really just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. This is one of our first webinars, so we'll also be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording of the webinar if you need to distribute it to anyone else on your team or follow along the steps. The PowerPoint really covers the steps from start to finish to setting this process up. As well, if you have questions along the way, our support team is always here to help. And get you any answers you need and just help get you more implemented with your product. You know, if you're ever curious about getting into another module or wanting to implement another module, definitely reach out to our support team, and we're here to help as well. One of our next webinars that we'll be presenting, I believe it will be around March, is going to be on our newly added palette tracking module. So recently in November we introduced palette tracking as an add-on module that you can purchase, and it's kind of one of our first steps into some of the functionality that's limited in SysPro, and it doesn't really it takes the pallet tracking functionality outside of SysPro and allows you to perform that within your operations, tracking multiple different types of stock codes and quantities on a pallet and performing those bulk transactions throughout all of the modules in riteSCAN. So if you're really interested in pallet tracking, feel free to reach out to our team. Otherwise, you'll be seeing that webinar invite probably for our next webinar, so you can learn all about pallet tracking in that as well. And if nobody else has any final questions or statements, I just wanted to thank you all again for joining us on our first webinar. Thanks for bearing along with me as we go through this process and try to get our customers as implemented as possible and make sure that we're always answering their questions and using it as efficiently as possible. So riteSCAN is a really helpful tool to increase your efficiency and accuracy. So we want to do that to the best of our abilities. So thank you all, and we'll be sending that information to you out shortly as well.